So, in keeping with the story or an idea of telling stories, I made an earlier video, but I misspoke because one summer I was driving uh, limousines for about 7 years. And one summer I kept having people come up to me and tell me that I look like Homie the Clown. And I told them that I was an actor, but I didn't have any idea who Homie the Clown was. And at this time, there weren't really smartphones and accessibility to YouTube videos and things like that in hand. So I had to check it out eventually by going online. But at the time, I had no idea who it was. And it was another actor in this TV show called In Living Color. And so I found that he did look like me because I was born first, and I'm older than him. So, but he's taller than me and a little bit lighter. But at the same time, I in keeping with the storyline, I've like worked constantly since about 5 years old. The recycling evolved into other things. I would show up at the store so much and use uh, fibs mixed with truths to finesse my way through situations and circumstances where I felt it was required. Um, Being that we went to Catholic school, we had a lot of holidays that the public schools didn't have. Saint this guy's day and Saint that guy's day, Ash Wednesday, and so on and so forth. I forget there were so many, but at those at, during those days, there were truant officers actually driving around, and when they would see stray kids, they would ask them what it is that they're doing or something like that. And some that times we would get half days off or other situations and circumstances. So I spent a lot of time hiding my books in the bushes and taking the recycle to the grocery store so much that I started coming with baskets full. And I started rummaging through the alleys, through the trash cans, getting them. And that evolved into being seen at the store so much that I started bagging groceries at the store for tip money and taking them to the cars. And then when people lived in the neighborhood, like I'd walk a block or two to their house and sometimes 3 or 4 blocks and got to know a lot of people in the neighborhood by taking their groceries and setting them down on their tables in their house. And I would see like bottles in their trash can in the house and started asking people to save their recyclables for me, and I'd go by and pick them up. And I'd end up at the store so much so that they had these push button cash registers that had like 50 buttons down and 100 buttons across or something like that. And then you hit this sidebar to register in the price of whatever it is that you had just rung up individually. So a lot of times I'd come there and I'd have baskets of bottles by then. I had evolved into a recycling monster, and I would fill up the baskets at the grocery stores. They'd have like, it was like three on the top and three on the bottom, these huge baskets for recyclables. And I was like filling up at least a basket with mine and coming out of there with cash money. And also taking people's groceries home and whatnot. I started collecting like models and I bought clothes and I bought shoes and I bought food and of course candy and ice cream and stuff like that. Never thought of investing it, which would have been smart, but I wasn't that savvy. But at the same time, hanging around in the store, I learned I would like watch the uh, the employees back at this time. They had these pricing hand devices called rotators that had an ink pad on the one side, and then you rotate like a series of like 6 or 7 numbers around this rubber belt, and each belt had numbers from 1 to 10 or dollar signs or different signs or uh, periods and exclamation points and stuff like that. And the ink would actually attach itself as you push down on this device. It would rotate from the ink pad down onto the merchandise, and this is how you priced everything. And when the guys that I knew that worked there weren't looking, or they had to go to the bathroom or something like that, I would grab the rotator and literally use a box cutter to open up the top. I learned how to open up product without cutting it open with box cutters and setting the variations on the box cutters so that you don't slice open everything. And I had the product price before they come back or something like that, pricing it right beside them. And I learned all the various departments that way to the point of where we ended up in the back rooms where I saw whole sides of cow hanging from meat hooks on a rack, like 6 or 7 of them. And they had a bandsaw, and then they had a place where they shrink wrapped, and they did had a conveyor belt in the back and roller tracks and stuff like that. And I learned the butcher shop, and then when the trucks would come to the bay doors and unload their the supplies to go down into the supply room, we were helping run the roller track into the truck to the conveyor belt and down in the basement, stacking supplies in their designated areas. I was doing this at like 10, 11 years old, up to about 15, when we were cleaning the managers' cars for them and taking them around back and washing them out by the loading dock doors and stuff like that. So I learned the entire uh, Grand Union 602 as a kid. Like even we had like in the produce section in the produce room they had a juicer that would punch like these 3 holes in oranges and make fresh juice. And at that time the stores closed on Sunday, so all the bread wouldn't be left on the shelves till Monday. We'd throw it out or we'd take bags of it home. So at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, I already had two or three jobs because of the fact that I was doing the recycling. I was at Catholic school, so we started learning Latin and serving the priests as altar boys around the altar in second grade. So by second grade, I had recycling job, altar boy job, and then being at the store so much, I had that as an occupation. And by the time I was 13 or 14, we had this children's amusement park that was several miles away from my home that we would ride our bicycles to. And I ended up getting a job there. It was called Kittyland Park, and they had literally a mini roller coaster, regular size merry-go-round, mini bumper cars. They had a train that went all the way around the park. I can't remember how many acres it was. It was about 6 acres or something like that, I would think. And it had a tunnel and pinball machines, and I mean, it had like this helicopter ride, and then like a ride where these cars went up in the air and came down, and it had a party area near where it had like a, a go-kart track, but they were on a track and went on a specific route around in an in an irregular shape. We had a lot of rides there. We had a ticket booth right at the front door. And I worked there for quite a few years. I can't remember how many years. But when I couldn't ride my bicycle there, I would hitchhike there because I was like really familiar with the neighborhood. A lot of times we would get rides to work. And I knew a lot of people in this neighborhood. We had a radio station right over the hill, WOOK and WOL, where Petey Green and Nighthawk and King B and a lot of other radio personalities would broadcast from. They broadcast, at that time it was African American or Afro American or like Caribbean, different kinds of music that were more ethnic oriented and a lot of jazz, blues, um, soul, Motown. A lot of those guys played that with this huge tower down by the railroad tracks that one year a guy climbed up onto the top of and sat down and shut the whole station down, and he started throwing his clothes off. We were there during that time, and like I knew those guys. I used to go to the radio station all the time and watch them on the air and talk to them and say hi. And sometimes King B would even give me a ride to work. I knew him as a neighbor, and we would talk a lot and interact. And a lot of times I knew a lot of people that way, like even when going down to the Smithsonian institutions to study or the National Archives, walking in and out of the Capitol, parking right at the door to the Capitol or the Washington Monument, or parking right out in front of the White House. Eventually, like when we were able to drive at 16 years old, just driving right up to doors and walking in. I got to do a lot of work and have a lot of jobs in this city working for a lot of people because of that. And that eventually blossomed into working with or volunteering to do shows with bands so that we could get backstage and see how shows set up and how performers set up, and learning lights and stage and sound enhancement and equipment and rigging and stuff like that, which went on to get me jobs at various auditoriums. I worked at Listener Auditorium, John F. Kennedy Center Jr. for the Performing Arts, Crampton Auditorium. I've worked at Meriwether Post Pavilion and other venues around the city. I've worked for Bill Graham Presents and Steve Wozniak and Unison Corporation because I was always finding work, always contracting myself out, always finding things to do. I ended up driving buses for my college, Georgetown University Transportation Society. That graduated into driving limousines for notables and the people that work and live around Washington, D.C. for graduations, weddings, Capitol Hill, for three different presidential administrations, and eventually going on TV and movie and film doing precision driving for movies like Shooter and Salt and Syriana and other movies. So I learned how to work, sell my talents, and graduated into basically selling myself just like we did when we did door to door.